Would you like a Cadillac car or a gas shot on jackpot? How about a date with Hedy Lamarr? You're gonna get it if you want it, baby.
Okay. All right. Let's get started here. We want to just do a quick hands-on intro to Git. We've heard that some people had some shall we say pains in moving from a primary SVM-based system into Git. So Rob and I, among others on the client team, we've had dealt with Git in our own way and have the scars to prove it. So we thought we'd share some of the experience. So, okay, first of all, what's Git? So, the dictionary definition is actually British slang for a foolish or contemptible person. Linus Torvalds, the guy who made Linux, he also was the founder of Git, and he, self-deprecatingly said he named it after himself, just like everything else. In short, it's basically a mechanism of getting you out of jams despite, being silly. That's the whole point of version control systems, right? So, okay. So some helpful resources. There's the Git SCM. I realize it's not too readable. Sorry about that. Itself.com. There's a helpful set of extensions called SCM Breeze, which I found really useful, and I'll show you some of that later on. I'll show you essentially a mix of both traditional Git commands and the shortcuts provided. There's also Git completion and Git prompt. Two parts. The completion allows you to do tab completion on things like branch names, tag names, etc., etc. So it'll speed things up. And prompt will also show you if you configure your bash prompt properly, it will also show you the branch name in parentheses. It just helps quite a bit.
So Peak might be a little Mac-centric here. For you Windows users, if you want to use Git completion, you're going to need to install Cygwin and use Cygwin's bash shell.
Right. Use a saying command line system and all that. Cygwin or MinGW. All right. So at any point, I'll essentially be jumping back and forth. And so let's get started. Let's go to our internal GitHub here, and we can essentially go ahead. And you can see I'm under me, myself. You can just click here. This will create a new repository. We can call this, Git tutorial. I'm not going to be too creative here. One thing that you can do here is just initialize it with a README. That allows you to, as it says here, you can clone it immediately. So that's helpful. So now this part, if you have your agent's credentials set up and all that, it's probably easier to use SSH as opposed to the default HTTP. Otherwise, they'll force you to type in username and password constantly. So down here, I can just say git clone that repository name, and you can give it a folder. So I can just say git tut for short. It'll go clone it. So let's see, switch into CD into that particular directory, and then you'll see, hey, there's now a README file here. Just for those of you who are not using GitHub necessarily, you can also make a directory yourself manually and type git init inside that. They'll do essentially the same thing. You just need to then push a remote or something like that. We'll cover that in a little bit. Okay, so let's create a file. In thorough, tradition of tutorials, rather than hello world, I'm going to write a calculator app. How very original, right? Okay. So let's put in some quick code. Say something like this. Ruby, we all know and love Ruby, so here it is. We define a class that's calculator, and we add it. So first command that you may be interested in is called git status. What, in short, it does is tell you what is, the status of this particular repository. Here now it says untracked files, etc. So Git doesn't actually know about this particular file. In order to make it know about this file, we can say, git add dot, which says add everything in this directory. This is in fact a little thermonuclear in the sense that you probably don't want to do this on a regular basis. And you probably want more fine-grained control. So if you hit git status again, it'll say changes to be committed, blah, 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 this file. Okay, so that's what we want.
Did you want to talk about what that actually did in terms of the index and the repository?
I figure you'd go into that in depth. Oh yeah, FYI, this is meant as a sort of a dual presentation. I'll do the grunt work of going through the nitty gritty of what you'll probably do in terms of the daily hands-on workflow. I think Rob will then explain in depth.
I'm going to go, once Peek has talked about the user level commands, I'm going to go into a little bit about the Git internals. But actually, this is a good point to just point out that when you commit in Git, it's actually a two-step process. You don't commit directly from your working copy into the repository. You add files to what's called the index or the staging area first. And when you commit, what you're committing is what's in the staging area. And people coming from Subversion might say, what the hell is the use of that? It actually turns out to be very useful. For example, you may have made a whole bunch of changes in your working copy, and you decide, well, that doesn't make sense to commit as a big blob. So you can commit it in. You could create two commits out of it by staging parts of it to be committed as one commit, and then the rest of it to be committed as a second commit. Just as an example. It's also useful for managing your work in terms of diffing and testing individual commits.
Just as part of that, I went ahead and reset this particular file. So if you say git status, just to show you what Rob's talking about. So say now this is untracked. Let's say I also edited the README.
Can you explain the word reset?
Yes.
What did it do for you?
Reset is the opposite of add.
Yeah, in some sense. So basically clears the index, if you will. And so let me just type in something into the really awesome tutorial. Say.
So I would think delete would be the opposite of add.
Yeah.
You would think.
So it's not exactly the most intuitive thing in the world. I mean, it's made sort of by engineers for engineers. So. And there is a bit of a learning curve, which is why we're having this at this stage in time. As a quick aside, so if you just do git status again, right? So you'll see one is modified and one is untracked. So this is actually different in the sense that when I initialized the directory, README was already there. So any modifications there are here, but at the same time, it's still not staged for commit. So when I type like git commit dash like something, so Git like changes, right? Git will actually warn me that there's nothing to commit because you haven't added anything to it. So as part of the SCM Breeze utility that I talked about before, one thing that's nice is it provides a lot of shortcuts. One of which is like GS instead of typing git status. Okay, that's not exactly groundbreaking, right? I'm not gonna bust my fingers typing a couple extra letters. But what is cooler is the fact that it would actually go ahead and label all these files for you. So when you're like typing tons of them and you want to selectively commit certain things, all the commands are hooked together so that rather than saying like git add calc.rb or whatever, you can just say ga2. So this is not a benefit right now because it's really short, but when you're working in deep nested directories with like 30, 40 files at once, it also takes ranges, so you can say like 1 through 20. It's really helpful.
And that's the depth?
Huh?
2.
No. It's the label. It's essentially labeled. So when you say GS, it'll name them sort of in order. Here are all the files it knows about. So in this case, I can say like git commit dash m basic calc with add, right? And then so now I can also say I can get status again. You can see this is a +1. What this means is that it's one commit ahead of master, so you have this change locally, but you haven't pushed it up to the remote repository. And similarly, you can say GA1 now, and then get updated README, right? So as part of what Rob was saying before is that in general, instead, we want to be more selective than saying just git add dot, because that adds everything in the directory. A lot of times, even though the directory structure is as is, logically it actually makes more sense to split it into separate commits. Okay.
So in Subversion, it seems like there are some things that you have to do directly in the repository, whereas here everything can be down the stage? Is that part of the advantage?
Yes,
Yes.
that is certainly one of the advantage in terms of explicitly changing that.
Not,
This
not,
commit was a commit to
This
the
is-
staging area or from the staging area to the repository?
the git commit command commits the changes that you've added to the staging area to the repository, so it becomes a new commit in the repository. The difference, another difference, major difference between Git and Subversion is that when you make your commit, you're committing to your local repository, the repository that's on your local hard drive. Publishing those changes so they can be shared with other team members is a push operation, and we'll get to that in a minute.
Yep. So now, a lot of you may tell me I'm a bad person because being good engineers, we should be writing tests. After all, that's the way we get it so that we can verify our code works. So here's a little blurb. Here's some test code. We have we're using essentially the test unit, which is Ruby equivalent of the XUnit tests. And we're just saying, here's the expected value, etc. Now, this bit of syntax is a little wacky, but this is basically Ruby's way of saying, if you run this file directly, it's going to execute the code blurb here. Meanwhile, if you just require it, which is the equivalent of include, it'll just define this. So now with this, we can say get status again. We can say, just mark this particular thing as executable. So now if we run calc, it's going to say, hey, it ran, it finished, one assertion, no failures, we're all good. Okay, so I can just git added again, so git commit added tests. Cool. So we're all good. Now let's see, what did all of that do just now? Yes, git k. Yeah, this is meant as a bit of like a whirlwind of but all these are in the slides. You guys don't have to take notes. We'll send it out later. So here, git k happens to be essentially the repository browser, a visual repository browser. So with that, you can sort of see where we've been so far. Now the -- all option that I typed would actually display everything, which means all branches, tags, etc. Right now it's not that useful, but we'll see later on. So as you can go back, you can see that here's the initial commit, what I actually pulled from GitHub itself. And you can see that here there's two. There's called like remote origins master, and then this is a master. Unfortunately, this git-k is one of those engineer utilities that are totally not designed with usability in mind. It doesn't zoom, it doesn't do anything. So it's micro text.
No, it's not actually a Mac application.
No.
Git-k is called Git-k because it's built using the GTK toolkit, which is...
That was written with TK.
Oh, maybe it's TK. You might be right. In any case, that's why it looks ugly and it doesn't really behave like a
Yes.
real Mac app.
So the size is like Monaco 10 point, and it's unreadable. But at any point, so basically you can see this colored blurb here, which is this represents what's actually on the server, and you can see that the past 3 changes that I made haven't actually made it up to the server yet. Now with here, for each of these particular changes, you can sort of browse here with the diff in terms of what the changes are, and then also attached to each of these are a SHA-1 ID here, which represents how Git internally identifies it. Rob will go into details on how that works. Okay, so now let's do something slightly more exciting than that. So part of what's cool about Git is that Git makes branching easy. What it suggests is that in your typical workflow, in general, to prefer using lots of small little feature branches. And as part of that, how you do that is, let's say we're trying to add a new piece of functionality called, subtraction, because our calculator needs the counterpart. So let's say git branch, subtraction branch. The equivalent command there is essentially GB for the SEM Breeze variant. So now you can say git branch, and then this will list all the branches that it knows about. Master is the default, and then here's a new branch. The asterisk next to it tells you what branch you're on. Since I added that like git prompt utility, you'll notice that my particular prompt also shows the branch name you're on currently in parentheses. So it just saves you the extra step with this.